Welcome to the IDP Advice Show. I am your host, Ricky Roderick. You can find me on X at RickyRod66. I'm joined as always by the very IDP knowledgeable and overall football knowledgeable Shawn Teague, who you can find on X at Shawn8386. Please give Shawn and I a follow. We're back this week with the continuing series on the top 24 repeaters and non-repeaters. Got great feedback from last year's series, so we're continuing it this year. This is our second show. Our first show last week was on edges / defensive ends / outside linebackers. So if you want to catch that show, if you missed it, you can go to our new channel that we're on, which is the NFL IDP Advice Network. Please subscribe to it and give it a like. And with that, Shawn, how about we jump in, man? What do you think?
Hey, I'm ready if you are. It's good to be back for round two here.
Round two it is. And so, as a reminder for folks, or for that have been listening to a while, but for those that might be new, one of the things and the reason we do this show is quite simply that repeat rates of the top 24 at each position is not nearly as high as you would think. So defensive tackles, the theme for this show, for those that are watching and listening, you can see the chart, but for those that are just listening, 6 of the top 12 is all that we have at a repeat rate in the top 12. For the top 24, only 11 of the top 24 repeat. That means 13 of the top 24 from the previous year do not repeat. This is over a 10, 11-year average, and last year, it was slightly above average at 12, but for this show, for this purpose, we're going to take the longer average and assume only 11 are going to repeat, and Shawn and I challenge ourselves to figure out which 13 are going to fall out of the top 24 and which 13 are going to move in. On the screen, we have the Kings Classic Dick Butkus Division scoring system is what we use. The important thing to take away from this scoring system is that the goal of it is to balance offense and defense scoring so that we have out of the top 100 scorers, 50 on offense, 50 on defense, which gives enough credence to the IDPs, and that's why we use it. We know there's tons of IDP scoring systems out there. We've chosen this one for this exercise. All righty, let's jump into the top 24. So on the screen, for those that are watching, we have the 24 names that were in the top 24. This is in total points, not in points per game. Some interesting names cracked the top 24 this past year, including Jalen Redmond, for example, from Minnesota, Brandon Dorless from Atlanta. And then you had names like Jihad Ward, Jonah Laulu, and Nathan Shepard, to name a few. Won't read through all 24, but you can go and look online, once again, on the NFL IDP Advice Network YouTube channel, and you can take a look at the entire list. But let's go ahead and quickly jump in, though, into who Shawn and I felt were going to fall out of the top 24. Now, Shawn and I do these independently, and then we merge the results together. And this year, for defensive tackles, we agreed on 10 of the 13 that we felt were going to fall out. For those watching, those are in the red color on the screen. Obviously, if we agreed on 10 of 13, that means we disagreed on 3 of the other 13. The ones that Shawn also felt were not going to repeat, he put in blue, or I put in blue, it's on blue on the screen, and mine are in purple. So we have some interesting names here, Shawn. Let's start off with a few of these that we both agreed that would not repeat. And one of those is Zach Sieler for the Miami Dolphins. And with you being a Dolphins fan, Shawn, why don't you talk a little bit about why you think that Sieler won't repeat this year?
Yeah, so last year we seen his numbers drop a good bit, both sacks, the tackles, and that's what's been holding him up is high tackle volume, and then he was getting double-digit sacks there for a couple of years. Well, that's now 3 and 4 years ago, and those numbers have been on a steady decline. Now we have a new head coach, new defensive scheme. I think they are going back to a 4-3. The emergence of Kenneth Grant, I think, will actually take some away from Zach Sieler, and he seems to be on the decline for me. And that was with a very bad offense last year. I really don't expect it to be much better this year. So I just don't see him getting the sacks. And that's the big plays are what win this scoring system. And you got to have them. And he's not getting them right now.
Yep. And the other thing I would add in terms of why I took him out was his age as well. So he's just creeping up in age, which is similar to the reason I left Cameron Heyward off the list. Some people jokingly call me an ageist because
I'm one of them that calls you that, yes.
yes, that is correct. But I think this is the year that he finally falls off. And I actually considered Derek Harmon as one of the ones that maybe replaces him in the top 24, but I couldn't go there because when I looked at Harmon's stats, it just wasn't enough there to lead me to believe he could jump that much to jump into the top 24. But this is an age thing combined with a new defensive coordinator and a new scheme that just not feeling 100% confident on, so that's why I left Heyward off the list.
I'm right there with you. I also almost put Derek Harmon on here. Couldn't go through with it either. But looking at Heyward, his tackles are phenomenal. In fact, he had the most tackles for a defensive tackle. But this particular scoring system, a quarterback hit is almost 2 tackles. So if you're not getting the hits or the sacks, the bigger plays, these guys get pushed down. And I think he only had like 5 sacks, I want to say, last year. And his quarterback hits were in the single digits. So he's getting to the quarterback less than half the time he has been in previous years. So not good. He's definitely on the decline. His age, 37. I think he'll be 38. He is definitely on his way out.
Yeah, there's an old saying that you'd rather get away from him a year early than a year later. And I think this is the year to get out on him. And Calais Campbell is another one that's up there in age, surprisingly finishes number 10, going back to part of his old stomping ground, the Ravens. But combination of a couple of things. One was the age, and 2, now he's dealing with this tragedy associated with his mom and his unfortunately his brother's been arrested in the murder of his mom and so forth. Well, and it's alleged and all that kind of stuff, but sure. Still, I think between the age and that, and then moving to a new team, even though he's played in Baltimore's new head coach, new scheme, etc., I just left Calais Campbell out for those reasons alone.
I left him in because he has been so versatile in so many different schemes over the last few years. He's been in the Arizona, Miami, and I think Baltimore, Jacksonville, been different schemes. Well, he's going back with Anthony Weaver, who is his coach and defensive coordinator in Miami. So that was a bit of a rejuvenation for him in Miami. So I'm actually expecting him to be solid enough to make this list. I don't know about top 12, but I think he still hits the top 24. That's why I left him on. I'm thinking that he may be a little more motivated just to, kind of play for his mom, I guess. I don't know if it's, that old trope there. I don't know if that's something that's going to happen or not, but I like to feel positive about it, especially with it being such a tragic scenario there. So,
and being the ageist I am, I had to leave him out by definition.
I knew you would. I knew you would.
Now, Cam Jordan is on the list because we did use MFL for the Kings Classic, and Cam Jordan was listed as a defensive tackle going into last year. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he ended up playing more edge, so he was a little bit of a cheat code for those that in defensive tackle required leads. He has been changed back to defensive end, so it was easy for us to leave him off the defensive tackle list. He'll be listed as a defensive end. That was one of the easier ones to deal with.
Yeah, him and Jihad Ward was the other one. With him also being a free agent, he also played quite a bit of the edge rush role there in Tennessee. But yeah, with no team and no real defined role, those two were the easiest ones to kick out. The only easy two.
Now, Shawn, you left Jordan Davis off the list. And I'd like for you to tell the audience why you don't think he'll repeat in the top 24.
Yeah, so I think Jalen Carter coming back and having a full season there will actually hinder Jordan Davis's numbers. I think he did benefit from Carter being out, missing so many games, and his tackles were so much higher than any other career or any other year he's had so far, which short career, that was only 4 seasons. But, he almost doubled like his career best in tackles, and his sacks were up as well. So I need to see it again before I'm ready to fully trust him. And like I say, I think it was a big benefactor of Jalen Carter missing time. I think he drops back down to more realistic numbers of, maybe 50 tackles and just a couple of sacks. Could still squeak on the list, but I think he just misses.
I disagree, Mr. Shawn.
It's obvious. It's right there in color.
Exactly. So if he was going to a different scheme,
Sure.
or if they had made some changes along the interior, brought in someone new or different or something along those lines, but it's still Carter and Davis and Ojimo, but 34 tackles and 36 assists, nice floor. And once again, he part of the thing last year with him, he was in the best shape of his career, and he actually played out that way. And so, does he get a total of 70 tackles between solo and assisted? Maybe that's a little bit on the high side, but there's no indication that he was at OTAs or minicamp out of shape or out of weight, overweight or anything along those lines, even though he had gotten the big contract and all. So I'm still feeling really good about him. I think the tackles are great. And then 4.5 sacks is what he had. 4.5 sacks is not a whole lot, and I think that's easily repeatable. He did get 6 pass defenses. Now, 3 of those were in one game. But he is tall, he is big. Remember, he blocked that field goal that got ran back for a touchdown and stuff. So he's going to get those big paws up, get a couple extra pass defense, which adds to the points as well. I still think Jordan Davis is easily primed for a top 24. So that's
okay to be wrong, Ricky. It's okay.
Yeah. So now one of the ones that I know you and I talked a little bit about on the show that you were shocked that I put on there was Zach Allen. He was the last of the 13 that I put on the list, Shawn. And I know you disagree with that.
Yeah. Do your best to convince me, Ricky. Let's hear it.
So the big thing, Zach Allen, while a very good player, has also been an accumulator to a certain degree. In 2024, he never played less than 75% of the snaps in any one game. So that was in 2024, year before last. And oftentimes he was in the 85-90% range. This past year, between weeks 1 and 7, he played between 70 and 81% of the snaps. But from week 8 to 17, he only played over 70% of the snaps twice. So the Broncos were really using a lot of rotation along their front line. We saw something similar with John Franklin Myers, who barely cracked the top 24 list, as we talked about. But even he was in that 48 to 55% range, using John Franklin Myers as an example. They have plenty of defensive tackles that are going to rotate. Zach is getting a little bit earlier. I think they're going to want to keep him fresh for the playoffs. So I think that his playing time will be down. And look, if you look at his stats, he only had 13 tackles, 23 assists, only 3 tackles for loss, or 3 additional tackles for loss, along with his 6.5 sacks. I own him in one of my favorite leagues, my Dyer's Dynasty League, and I can't tell you how many times it looked like he was going to get a sack, and he didn't. But I just think that playing time, another year age-wise, I think he is at risk of falling out of the top 24. Like I said, he was the last one I took off of this list, but I did take him off for those reasons.
He was the easiest one for me to leave on the list.
Even ahead of Simmons and Williams. Interesting.
Yes. Even above those guys. For him, it's the same defense, same coordinator. Since he's been in Denver, I mean, he is by far leading the way with quarterback hits. And like I said earlier, this league in particular really gives points to quarterback hits. It doesn't have to be the sacks. So 47 last year led the league. The second closest was Chris Jones with 25. So that's a big number. So you're thinking maybe that's an outlier. The year before, he had 40 quarterback hits. So I'm seeing him being able to do it multiple years. He's still getting 7 sacks, 8 sacks for a defensive tackle. Phenomenal. That's elite. So when somebody gets double digits, it's, a mega season like Jeffrey Simmons this past year. So he's still getting the numbers. He's still getting plenty of playing time, or he's making the best of his playing time. I'll give you that. And looking at strength of schedule, Denver's got the best strength of schedule for defensive linemen. They're at the top of the list. They have the easiest schedule. Based on points from last year, obviously that'll shift and skew a bit this year. So everything looks right, in my eyes, for him to stay at such a phenomenal level. I think he's only 29, 28, not quite 30. Defensive linemen, especially interior guys, can hang in there a little longer. So I'm not worried about him for probably the next few years.
All righty. So that is one we agreed to disagree on.
Heavily.
Now, speaking of ones that we didn't agree on, I left Osa Digizua on the list. I got pretty good at pronouncing that one, whereas, Shawn, you took him off the list. So the reason I left him on, Osa talked about the new scheme as he's traded San Francisco and how he feels like that it is going to be a much more aggressive scheme, more downhill scheme. Osa, one of his strengths is actually rushing the passer if he's unlocked to do so. His stats last year: 16 tackles, 24 assists, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Raheem Morris is coming over now as a defensive coordinator, who is the former Falcons head coach. And if you look at some of the Falcons' interior defensive linemen, Brandon Darlis, LaCale London, Zach Harrison, at different points of the year, all of three of those guys did something, and they're not exactly household names. So I think Osa, with his talent in this scheme, can be very effective. And so that is why I chose to leave him on the list, Shawn.
Yeah, and he was actually one of the last ones I took off. Him and actually Brandon Dorless were the last two I took off. And for Osa, he's had very consistent numbers with his years in Dallas. Roughly 40 tackles, 3 to 4 sacks. Quarterback hits are pretty consistent there too, in that 20 range. Just going to a new team, new scheme. Going from playing indoors to outdoors in the cursed regions that is San Francisco.
You think that
for injuries,
that whatever that power plant thing,
radio tower, whatever that is over there, it's gonna take him out. So just the unknown of seeing him, in a whole new spot like that, and he barely makes the list a lot of times. Like he's not a top 12 guy, so it wouldn't take much for him to shift out of this list or to stay in it. It's a very volatile cutoff, very volatile bubble here for these guys. And like he was hard to take off the list. So I could see him having the same numbers we've grown accustomed to over the last 4 years or whatever. But just with the unknowns, I went ahead and took him off.
Yep. Well, you brought up Brandon Dorless, who I left on the list. And in this scoring system, from weeks 9 through 17, Dorless was the number 5 defensive tackle. He had 7 of his 8.5 sacks during that latter half of the year. Now, granted, there will be a new head coach there, so we'll see how it plays out. But with the big play scoring there, 8.5 sacks, I decided to leave him in there, and particularly with 7 in the second half of the year. One of the things I like to do, and I know you can't just say, hey, well, you take the second half of the year, you multiply it by 2, and then that's what he's going to do the following year. I know it's not quite that easy, but I do like to look for improvements of players in the second half of the year. And Dorless is fairly young. He was a 3rd-round draft pick just a couple of years ago, and seeing that improvement, it's like, okay, the light bulb went off and so forth. So felt pretty good about Dorless. Now, his tackles, that was on the lower slide. So if you're playing in a tackle-heavy league, I'm not feeling as good when he only had 15 tackles, 12 assists. Now, he had 11 tackles for loss, but 8.5 of those were the sacks. So that means he only had 2.5 other run stops for a tackle for loss, basically. Now, the other thing that, I talked about Zach Allen's snap count. Darlis only went over 60% once the entire year. So if they give him the additional opportunities, in terms of more playing time, combined with some of that upside on the sacks, I kind of like him. And so I'm holding on to Darlis, and I'm keeping him in the top 24, Shawn.
Yeah, and I think he just misses. And even though they do have a new coach, head coach, and all that, they did keep Jeff
Keep
Ulbrich.
Ulbrich, exactly.
Yeah. So that was I think that was the right move for them. And just traditionally with him, he does do a little more rotation on the line. And with some of these guys coming back from injuries this year, may move Darlis a little bit, cut some of his playing time. I really don't know, but it came down to the sacks, the quarterback hits, 11 quarterback hits, 8.5 sacks. That's pretty efficient. So basically, when he's getting back there, he's getting the sack, but he's not getting back there 40 times, like a Zach Allen. And about half as much as, Chris Jones, Odigizua, and those guys. But again, half the season. So the projection looks good, but there's no tackles to back that up if he doesn't. The tackles were low, and with just seeing a really strong half of a season, I'm not ready to really go chase him just yet on something like that. Now, if he does it again this year, then he's probably going to be on it for me next year. But I want to see it again. We've seen guys finish strong at the end of a year and flop the next. Looking at you, Adrian Cooper.
Yes, we'll be talking about linebackers next week as a side note and we'll talk about them a little bit later as well to set the stage. But yes, Adrian Cooper, yes, that's one of those. And that's why you always want to be careful. But back to your point about the same scheme and Ulbrich, that's what gives me a little bit of hope as well. So that's the arguments for Brandon Darlis. Chris Jones, I took him off, you left him on. Shawn, I'll let you go first in terms of why you left him on.
I took him off and I put him back on. I took him off again and put him back on. So this is a player I flipped back and forth quite a bit. It really came back down to just the consistency he's had. Sure, his sacks are down, but his sacks are down with where a lot of the other defensive tackles are now. So he's not getting the big 10, 15 sacks, the huge years for defensive tackles. So he's right there with the normal guys, I guess. The Leonard Williams, just under Brandon Darlis, who again was one of the top defensive tackles leaders in sacks. So, but his quarterback hits are still second. He's consistently getting 25 or better. Still in the same scheme. Sure, he disappears for games. That's probably the most frustrating part. Is you're not going to see it on your team because he does disappear, but he has those big games.
It's all or nothing.
It really does, but for whatever reason, he keeps making the list, and for his consistency, I left him on. I personally am not drafting him. I'll just go throw that out there for everybody, but I do think he makes the list.
So that's an interesting point, and you would be right to not want to draft him. When I just watch the games, if he doesn't get a sack, he's not doing anything else. And when you see things start to break out and go to the outside, he's hard to miss on the screen, and you see him just jogging. He is not going to be when those defensive tackles running sideline to sideline, chase him down. I think he and Kelsey, it's 1 year too much. I think Kelsey's going to struggle at tight end this year too, particularly with all his marriage festivities. I'm sure. Let's see.
I've noticed my receiving numbers have went down since I've got married too, Ricky. It affects all of us.
Spend your time with Taylor Swift or spend your time, in the workout room. Which one would you do? Okay, I digress. We're talking about
not
Chris
get
Jones.
beat up and live rich. That sounds terrible.
With a fairly attractive person at that. But so Chris Jones, because it's all or nothing, I think there's going to be more nothings than all I think, yes, there will be 4 games where Chris Jones will have a sack and a half or something along those lines. The others, good luck guessing when they are, and you're going to get a lot of goose eggs or basically 1 assisted tackle, maybe 1 tackle, and that's going to be about it. So
Yeah.
I do not feel good about Chris Jones. I am pulling him off of this list.
And
No.
I did. I took him off of it. When I looked at some of the numbers, even though my recollection of him last year was he sucks, he quits, his heart isn't in it. His numbers were right where they usually are. So I kept putting him back on. Not proud of it, but it's the reality of it.
Well, let's talk about one more that's on the list, and that's DeForest Buckner, Shawn. Now, he was one that I really struggled with. Do I leave him on or off because of that neck injury? He had neck surgery, didn't participate in OTAs and mini camps, questionable if he'll be able to practice at the start of training camp coming up here. And then that leads you to believe, well, will he be able to play at the start of the year? Will he be on PUP to start the year, etc.? The reason I ended up leaving him on, and I'll be interested in why you left him on, is simply because he is so good. I think even if he plays 11 or 12 games, that he will put up enough points to be in the top 24. But there's a huge risk here, and particularly if you're in a league that doesn't have injured reserve slots, then you could have a problem in terms of rostering him. Once again, depending on how deep benches are as well. If you do draft him, that is a serious risk. So Shawn, I left him on because if he does get on the field at some point, I think he'll do well, but the question is a big if.
Yeah, absolutely. The last 2 seasons we've seen cut a bit short because of injuries. 10 games last year, 11 or 12 the year before. But his numbers kept him comfortably on this list. That's just how dominant he is while on the field. He's getting the sacks, he's getting the tackles, he's getting the quarterback hits. I mean, he's phenomenal when he's on the field, but it is frustrating, especially the last 2 years, for him to go through his injuries. And neck injuries are super tricky too. We've seen him cut plenty of people's careers short. Not usually the big guys, though, so this will be interesting. It does bring a lot of concern.
Now, I'm going to do one more shout out on this list of top 24, and then we'll move on to who do we think is going to replace him. And that's for Jalen Redmond. So when I was doing research for the show, Shawn, his numbers, we talked about some of Jordan Davis's, tackle numbers and so forth. But Jalen Redmond, 32 tackles, 27 assisted tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, of which he recovered 1, 6 sacks, 5 pass defenses. And that says for a third-year player. Was really, really impressed when I stepped back and looked at those numbers and said, wow. And now, he did lose Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrove, some of those veterans around him, but I still think that he can perform like that. Same system that Brian Flores' scheme seems to have worked for him. So love me some Jalen Redmond, and I have to admit, as I'm getting ready for some of my bigger IDP drafts, including the upcoming Kings Classic, after going through this, I'm bumping him much higher on my list in terms of draftable defensive tackles.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and it may be a little more hypocritical for me to call out Brendan Dorless for not doing it more than 1 year, but then having Redmond in a similar situation. But
it is.
I believe in Flores more than I do Ulbrich.
Okay.
And
That's
I've
fair.
seen what Flores did for Christian Wilkins and Zach Sieler in their times in Miami, turned those guys into top 5 guys, both of them. I've seen what he did last year for the old guy Jonathan Allen, the old guy Javon Hargrave. Like, both of them, when on the field, they were putting up decent numbers. And they had Redmond in there too, putting up numbers. So his scheme creates the matchups we need for this scored system, actually. So yeah, I believe in that more than I do Ulbrich.
And what was interesting, both Redmond and Jonathan Allen made the top 12. although neither one of us put another Vikings defensive tackle into the top 12. And so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about another neck injury as we move to the next slide. So which is where we're going to talk about who we see going into the top 24. As the great Bob Harris of Football Die Hard says, we're trying to draft this year's best team, not last year's best team. So as we talked about, on average, 13 fall out, 13 need to come in. So Shawn and I have compiled our list. We agreed on 9 of the 13 that we felt like we're going to enter into the top 24. We differed on 4 of those names. Now, one of the names, we talked about neck injuries, and I want to bring him up even though neither one of us put him on the list, and that's Nnamdi Madubuike for the Baltimore Ravens. So he had a neck injury, had neck surgery. We put Buckner on, but we didn't put Madubuike on. Shawn, why didn't you put Madubuike on the list?
Because right away they were talking about his being potentially career-ending, whereas Buckner's has been more of a lingering, later developing kind of thing. Madubuike's was way more serious, I believe, especially initially. But there are talks he's potentially coming back this season. I haven't for sure heard when and to what capacity. So with those major unknowns, new defensive scheme, everything like that too. There's a lot of variables there. I hope he does come back and is able to have a full career, but his seemed way more riskier than Buckner's. Whereas Buckner was also dominant when he's on the field. Madubuike had just a few years of pretty good numbers.
So I'm right there with you. It was the seriousness of the injury and the thought that it was career ending, where we didn't hear any of that talk with Buckner. So that is the exact reason I left him off the list as well. Obviously, we'll have to monitor as we get into training camp and see what happens, but that was my rationale. I do want to go back to the Vikings discussion as well before we talk about who we put on the top 24 list in terms of joining it. So I mentioned just now that Redmond was on, Jonathan Allen was on, but yet neither one of us added a Minnesota Viking. I didn't feel good enough about Levi Drake Rodriguez. I didn't feel good enough about Jonah Williams, and I didn't feel good about putting in a rookie, whether it be Caleb Banks or Dominique Orange.
Big citrus.
Big citrus. And he is big.
He is big.
So, Shawn, same thing with you? You felt the same way on these Vikings? You weren't going to chance a rookie?
No rookies, and I view the other guys as rotational pieces. And I think that's what we'll see those 4 guys rotate those other 2 positions on this defensive line, where Redmond's pretty much earned his spot. He is a starter, and he's going to run with it. I don't see the other guys having enough playing time to be able to generate consistent snaps week in and week out.
All right. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about some of the names that we did agree on the list. And one of them is Ed Oliver with the Bills. So Oliver only played 3 games last year. Shawn, why don't you talk about why you have Ed on the list?
Yeah, in those 3 games, he had a sack in each game. And that's fantastic production. It probably wouldn't have worked that way for all 17 games. But we've seen him shine in the past. And season cut short with injury. We're coming into a new scheme. It's supposed to be a more attacking front. It's also switching to a 3-4. So he will not be manning the middle by himself. He will have 2 friends up there. Plus the outside edge rusher. So I think we see him jump back into possibly the top 12 here.
Yeah, so he had a great start to the year last year. In those 3 games, he was averaging, once again in this Kings Classic scoring system, over 28 points a game, which put him at the top of the list basically for those 3 games. Unfortunate with the injury, and he has had some injury concerns through the years.
Yes.
I much rather see defensive tackles, and this is something you and I can debate maybe in a different show. I'd much rather see him in a 4-3 than a 3-4, to be honest with you.
I agree.
Because then they're trying to fill 2 gaps, more of a chance of them being double teamed, etc. But I think that, to your point, the attacking style of difference that Jim Leonard, the new defensive coordinator, is supposed to be putting in place. combined with what we saw last year, and he's only 28 years old. You know, he feels like he's been in the league forever, but he's only 28 years old. And so I think this could be the year that Ed Oliver breaks out, and this is the year that I see him actually not just in the top 24, but in the top 12. Now,
we agree.
yeah, now going on to Malik Collins, some people might be surprised by us putting him on the list. Shawn, would you like to go first on Malik Collins?
Yeah, this is a guy who's usually just outside the top 24, a consistent top 30 guy. He has been in the top 24 before. And his role in Cleveland, much to last year, is he's getting the tackles, consistent tackles. So he's good against the run, but he also throws in a handful of sacks. I believe he had six
and a
sacks.
half. 6.5 in 13 games before he was out for the rest of the year.
And that's really enough to make this list. The top guys are getting 7. So anything around that, and great if you can get above that. So he's getting the sack numbers, and he's efficient enough against the run, where some of these guys are really good at stopping the run, but they don't get the sacks and the hits. Again, the hits and sacks in this scoring system is what really shoots these guys up. So he's consistent enough for me to sneak in there.
Yeah. His tackles weren't that great last year in looking at the numbers, but throughout his career, he has had good tackling years. Last year was not necessarily one of them, but he was on the list for me because of the sacks. 6.5 in 13 games. That will hopefully be enough if he plays a full season, gets a little bit more share of snaps this year. That's why I have Malik Collins in there. It's not one of my favorite picks, but he's in there, and it's because of the sack upside that I'm hoping for. Now, you brought up Kenneth Grant from the Miami Dolphins a little bit earlier. Your Miami Dolphins, in fact, when we were talking about Zach Sieler. So talk a little bit about Kenneth Grant, Shawn.
I see him getting a full start, full-time starting role this year, where last year he was splitting time with, I think it's Benito Jones. I want to say somebody else snuck in there a few times. He was a rookie. He was getting worked in there. So this year, I see him taking over a full-time starting spot next to Sieler. This defense is going to be on the field a lot again. So I expect his tackle numbers, I think he had in the 30s, maybe just in the 30s in tackles last year, total tackles, that is. Just a couple sacks. So if he doubles those numbers, that puts him right here in the top 24. I don't expect him to shoot anywhere near the top of these guys. I see him as a guy who could just sneak in the top 24.
Well, what's interesting about him, there was a lot of buzz here in the OT and mini camps about how he was in better shape, the light bulb was going on, blah, 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 all those,
camp stuff. Yeah.
All the camp stuff. But it's good when you have a first year, well, it was a rookie, now going into his second year, with that kind of discussion, reshaped his body a little bit. Mm-hmm. And he did have 32 tackles, 15 of those were solo, 17 assisted, a couple of tackles for loss. Those were 2 sacks. I think he has a little bit upside to that to get maybe 4 sacks, up that tackle number, up his playing time. So for me, I see him in the top 24 easily over Zach Sieler. I just have no confidence in Sieler, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, his numbers dropped so much last year. For the last couple of years, they've really dropped. And I think part of that was inflation from the schemes he was in before, and just he's getting past his prime. So I'm with you on Sieler for sure.
Now, we both had Malcolm Roach on the list, and we were talking before the show how we were both surprised that the other one had, thought about putting him on. Shawn, I had one reason, and one reason only, for putting him in there, and it's as simple as John Franklin Myers moved to Tennessee, mm-hmm. and Roach is going to move into the starting lineup in his place, it appears. And so Franklin Myers barely snuck in the top 24, and I think Roach will barely sneak in the top 24. He was the last person I put on this list.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Him and probably one of these other guys we're going to talk about here in a little bit were the last 2 I put. But yeah, I thought that was a bit of a sneaky one to get in there. Similar to Malik Collins, where you're getting another guy who's consistently like a top 30 guy who can just get in there with just a few more tackles and maybe a sack or 2 more. Those type of numbers, but consistent player. And like I said, he's in line to get a lot more playing time with Franklin Myers gone. But yeah, 40 tackles the last 2 years, averaging about 3 sacks. Quarterback hits are a bit low, but like I said, all it would take would be to up those just a little bit to get in this top 24.
Yeah. Now, Tommy Togiai for the Texans, you and I both had on the list. And so just once again, as I talked about earlier, I like to look at some of the second half of the stats, particularly second half of this, the stats in the second half of the season. Ricky, slow down and talk correctly. Okay. So I like to look at that. And in his particular case, in weeks 10 through 17, he had 16 of his 23 tackles, 25 of his 32 assisted tackles, and his 1.5 sacks. Also, from week 13 through the playoffs, he outplayed 54% or more of the snaps, where he wasn't playing quite that much most weeks prior to week 13. In fact, in the last game, in the playoff game, he actually played 72% of the snaps. So they're desperate, they're losing, they're playing top players, and he's getting all those snaps. All of that made me feel really good, particularly what he did in those last several weeks of the regular season I was talking about, that playing time in the playoffs. He's got Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter around him, which occupy extra blockers, which frees him up some more on the inside. Tommy Togiai in the top 24.
Easily. Yeah, he was the second easiest ad for me. And like I said, I like the way he finished. I like the attacking style defense that the Texans play. D'Amico Ryans is, again, believing in the coach, believing in the system. All-star players around him. Weak division. He's going against Daniel Jones, Cam Ward. The Tennessee Titans have historically been terrible on the offensive line. Daniel Jones probably going to be in for a rougher year this year.
He's not going to have the mobility coming off that Achilles injury.
Yeah, not at all. So, I see Togiai having a fantastic season.
Okay. Now, let's talk about maybe a couple of names that you and I differed on. And you went Devonte Wyatt. So talk about Wyatt.
So I like the way he started last year. He was having a good year without Kenny Clark next to him. It kind of felt like they were always competing a bit in years past. See whose year was it going to be? Started out great. He'd already got close to his career high in sacks. He was at 4 sacks. Had the solos he needed tackle-wise. Got injured, cut a little short. I think he gets right back there again. Having Javon Hargrave next to him to eat up some folks will help. Not having Micah Parsons, though, might slow him a little bit, but pressure's got to come from somewhere. I think he can do it.
Well, so there was one reason I left Devonte Wyatt off in his injury.
Because of Micah Parsons?
No, because Wyatt's injury actually happened much later in the year, last year. And I just think it's a longer recovery, and I think it'll be a much slower start as a result. And so if he was fully healthy for week 1, I would feel, if his injury would have happened much earlier in last season so he could be much more healthy going into week 1 this year, I think that's a better way of saying it, then I would have put him on the list. I just think it was too late in the year. I think that means more ramp time as the regular season goes, and I think he would just miss being in the top 24, so that's why I left him out. But Travis Jones is someone that I did put into the list. From weeks 9 through 17 last year, Shawn, he was the number 10 defensive tackle in points per game in the scoring system. He had all 4 of his sacks during their time, 13 of his 19 tackles, 18 of 23 assisted tackles, 6 of 8 tackles for loss, all in that latter part of the year. Just feels like either they figured out how to turn that monster on, or the light bulb went on, or something along those lines. And while I don't have Calais Campbell coming back in my top 24 as an example, having someone like Calais Campbell, having someone like Trey Hendrickson around him as well, I think that bodes well for Travis Jones, and I see him coming to the top 24. Now, you have Daron Payne. Why don't you talk about Daron Payne?
Yeah, so Daron Payne, we've seen him produce in the past. Just missing the list the last year or two. New defensive coordinator here, coming over from Minnesota, Daronte Jones, under the Brian Flores coaching tree. The way Flores attacks with his defensive tackles at that front line. I'm going on a bit of a limb here, thinking that Daronte Jones will do something similar with Washington, changing that system up. And Daron Payne is in a contract year. So I see extra motivation as well for somebody who can just sneak in. Usually consistent with his tackles. It's the sacks and quarterback hits that need to pick up for him to really take off.
Yeah, so Payne was one that I actually considered as well, along with Jerzon Newton or Johnny Newton, depending on which first name you want to use for him. But
Johnny's easier.
yeah, Johnny is easier to say and spell. But I'm kind of a little bit torn on what this Washington defense is going to look like with this new defensive coordinator. And they signed Tim Settle. They have Newton. They have Payne. They have Dietrich Wise they re-signed. Then they have all these edges they signed with Armstrong coming back. And they signed Chason and Owe, who we talked a little bit about last week and all. Then they also have Luvu and Styles and Chanel. I just don't know what this defense is going to look like. There's some individuals that I feel really good, but it feels like this defensive line, they went really deep to be able to have a lot of rotation. And that's the one thing that held me back on Daron Payne.
That's a fair argument.
Yeah. But if they give him enough snap count, because the year he really went off, he was playing like 80% of the snaps when he had his biggest year. And he hasn't had anything close to that since then. So that is, with all that rotation, that is my one concern on him. But you and I both went with some oldies but goodies. You went with Harrison Phillips. I went with Adam Butler. My rationale on Butler is he has a pretty decent tackle floor, and if he can get a few more sacks, he's in there. If Nathan Shepard from my New Orleans Saints can crack the top 24 at age 31, I believe it was last year, I think Butler can make a reappearance in this with the new Raiders defense and make it into the top 24. So I think it's going to be as simple as Butler has his tackles, gets a couple more sacks, and he makes it into the top 24. That's my Butler argument. You on Phillips.
Yeah, I'm with you on Butler, man. I almost put him in here too. I put him in here last year after the Christian Wilkins fiasco there of him being released and whatnot. So, but he came up just short. I got hurt or something. But yeah, I do not hate the Butler arguments. Harrison Phillips, there's not a whole lot going for the New York Jets. He was really good against the run. He got a lot of tackles. His tackle numbers are great. But he only had half a sack and one quarterback hit. So I'm hoping they're changing up the defense. If he can get just a few more or any quarterback hits and some sacks, it would be enough just to get him in there because the last few years, even without Flores, his tackle numbers are great. Are good enough to get him at least in this scoring system right there near the bubble. So just a few more sacks will get him in.
So we'll see which of the old men we picked sneak into the top 24 when we get to the end of the year.
Yeah, surely somebody will run into these guys behind the line, right?
Yeah. Now, going the other direction for younger guys, I went with Mason Graham. And once again, this is another one. He was a rookie last year. Typically, we don't put rookies on this list, and we're usually right about doing that. Going into his second year, and once again, particularly for rookie, I'm looking at what happened in the latter part of the year. So one of the good things is from week 10 to the end of the year, his snap count ranged between 63 and 80%, which was fantastic for a snap count for defensive tackle. And look, he had 19 of his 27 tackles during that time period, half of his assisted tackles during that time period, 2 of his 4 sacks, and 5 of his 7 tackles for loss. So just as, you know, when you look at his stats on a week-by-week basis, you just saw that big improvement second half of the year to first half of the year. I'm not expecting like 6 or 8 sacks, but I think there'll be enough of a tackle floor with a few sacks and a few tackles for loss that's going to get Graham into the top 24 this year, and potentially in his third year, we're talking about top 12 to 15.
Yeah, Mason Graham's a good pick. I considered him myself. It was the lack of sacks that kept him out for me, and that's all it was. And even going back to his time in college, it's tackles and disrupting, but not always getting the stats we need for fantasy football. So with his track record, I was a little nervous to put him on the list, but your rationale is fantastic.
So Gervin Dexter, Shawn.
Gervin Dexter, he's put up some pretty good seasons so far. Or the last 2 years, his sack numbers increased from 5 to 6. Tackle numbers went down. Quarterback hits went down. I'm thinking this is maybe just the adjustment to a new defensive scheme. Another year in it. So we have Grady Jarrett next to him, a former defensive tackle stalwart for IDP owners. I'm expecting his numbers to continue to increase on the sacks, tackle numbers to jump back up, maybe in the 50 to 60 range, double his quarterback hits, and I think he gets in. I think he was just outside the top 24 last year.
Did you mention contract year for him?
I didn't, because I was thinking it's fifth-year option time, right?
Yeah, I think so. And so I think he's got some motivation for another contract as well, which we've seen sometimes that play out, that narrative, and we've seen other times where that narrative does not play out. But it is just another thing to keep in mind for those that believe in that narrative about, as the contract's coming up. All right, so just some quick one-liners, Shawn. Why don't you just do a quick one-liner on Javon Hargrave?
Javon Hargrave, just an old beast. Yeah, I completely blanked out where he went for the moment. The Packers. So playing next to Wyatt, I'm thinking he's a bit rejuvenated again, and can put up solid enough numbers just to sneak in. He is older, he's slower, but defensive lineman can go a little longer than the edge rushers. So,
yeah. My one-liner on Hargrave is this: he's going to get a lot of playing time.
Yeah, there's not much behind him.
Exactly right. I'm not trusting Nazir Stackhouse, Kobe Wooden. Wait, what is it? Wooden or Brooks that got traded? Maybe it's Brooks that they have. I'm sorry, my bad. Devonte Wyatt. There's just not much, and he's coming off the injuries to talk about. There's just not a whole lot there. I think he's going to get plenty of snaps, and that'll be enough to get him in here. Okay. Walter Nolan, my one-liner is he's got great draft capital. He flashed when he was healthy. He had some injury problems in college, and he had in his first year in the pros. I'm hoping he stays healthy. That's my one-liner for putting him in.
I'm right there with you. Just avoid the injuries, and I think he's a shoe-in.
Okay. We both have Jalen Carter in here. I don't think we need to talk much about him. And let's see, is there anybody?
Nobody, and you should be fine.
Yeah, exactly. He did miss 3 games, but once again, he hasn't gotten that contract yet.
Yeah.
And he was another one, had a really strong second half of the year. So really like what I saw there.
What's Sexy Dexy here? New team, traded right before the draft.
Yeah, I think for Dexter Lawrence, I think it's a motivation. And I think he'd be highly motivated. And last year, he was playing with that elbow injury. And I think that had a much bigger impact than he or the Giants ever wanted to talk about. So he was on the field. He was a leader. He was a warrior. But I think that elbow injury really hurt him last year. And I think he should be past that and back to that motivation factor after the trade and plus the new contract. I think Dexter Lawrence is going to be back in the top 24.
Right there with you, and I like the pairing with him and Jonathan Allen. B.J. Hill's playing right behind him too, another good, solid player who doesn't get a lot of recognition. In fact, I kind of hate that one of these guys is going to knock him out of the full-time start. But
so to wrap it up, because the last one on this list that we haven't talked about is B.J. Hill. I actually included him on the list. He has tended to have a really good tackle floor in last year, 25 solo, 33 assisted. Now, and he did get decent playing time, but it wasn't like he was playing 80% of the snaps. So with the additional defensive tackles that they brought in, they can have a rotation with Dexter Lawrence, with Jonathan Allen, with him, with maybe TJ Slayton, maybe it's the rookie Robinson, maybe McKinley Jenkins. But so there'll be some sort of 4-man rotation in there. But I'm not scared away from that. And I think B.J. Hill, particularly his tackle floor, and I think with some help on the edge that they'll have now with Miles Murphy seem to be turning it on a little bit. Finally, they picked up Cassius Howard, Mafe. Not that I'm huge fans of any of those guys individually, but I think there'll be enough there to help the interior. And so I think that'll help B.J. Hill to sneak in. Even over Jonathan Allen, I have Lawrence and Hill both making it from the Bengals. So
well said, Ricky.
All righty. So that concludes the the additional 13 that Shawn and I believe will make it into the top 24. If you want to see the whole list, once again, go to the NFL IDP Advice Network YouTube channel. Please subscribe and please like this show. And Shawn and I, we did get some questions after our first show on the edge/defensive end/outside linebackers. So please be sure to go and check that out. If you missed it, I think you get some really good information there. Now, we always like to preview the upcoming show. The next show will be focused on linebackers. And Shawn, I'm going to go ahead and flash the top 24 here on the screen. I always ask you this. As you look at this list of top 24 linebackers, how you feeling?
Sebastian Dennis is going to be an easy kick off this list.
I thought you were going to say Jermaine Pratt, since he's not on a team yet, or Bobby Okereke.
Nope. I have more faith in him finishing higher than Sebastian Dennis.
But the linebackers
this is going to be tough.
Yeah, the linebackers are once again where 13 need to come off of the list. Similarly, so on average, only 11 of the top 24 repeat. And what's interesting, only 4 of the top 12 repeat. Now, we're not trying to narrow between 12 and 24. We're only doing just the total top 24. But so a lot of these names are going to change year over year. There's names like Bobby Wagner, Devin White on the list as an example. So
Bobby Okereke. Yeah.
Bobby Okereke, or like my son likes to say, Okereke, even though I tell him it's Okereke. No, he doesn't like to go there.
But just from year to year, we don't know anymore.
All right, so we will be. Go ahead, Shawn.
One more thing before we go. There's the name we didn't bring up that keeps generating buzz, especially as of late. Mr. Aaron Donald for the Rams, since this is a defensive tackle show.
I meant to bring him up, and I completely forgot. I am so glad you did that. Shawn, what is the odds, percentage-wise, that Aaron Donald is going to suit up for the Rams is the first question.
Depends on which article I read. It seems to be it seems to be generating more steam every few days. It keeps getting brought back up, either by some emoji on Twitter or something else. But since he already has a ring, I think he's not as motivated. But if he does come back, we're looking at 2 years of rust to get back in shape. Sure, he's been working out, but there's no substitution for actually being out on the field. So it would take him a little while to get going.
I believe he's 35 years old, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's asking a lot to jump back in there and dominate. So even if he does start half the season, I don't know. He craps the top 24. It'd be tough.
Yeah, so Brandon Graham came out of the retirement for the Eagles. He came in roughly middle of the season, and they used him a little bit. Now, I can see Aaron Donald skipping training camp, starting to get in shape with a goal for maybe week 8, week 9, halfway through the year. He comes in, he plays, 25, 30, 35% of the snaps, maybe, just to get ramped up for the playoffs. And then come playoff time, then they can use him maybe 45, 50% of the time. But they don't necessarily need to unless there's injury, because they've got Kobe Turner, they've got Braden Fisk, they've got a little bit of depth on the interior there on the bench. So I just see him used in more of a specialty role and not like a 75, 80% guy. So that's why I did not put him on the list for all those reasons.
And I would say if he didn't already have the ring, he'd already be there.
That's a good point.
So, but it's not a need.
And that's the other thing, too. If Matthew Stafford happened to get hurt early in the year, he's not coming out of retirement.
No, I don't want to do that. Yeah. The Ty Simpson Rams, no thanks. I'll stay retired.
So I can't believe I forgot to bring up Aaron Donald. I'm so glad you did before we brought this in. Thank you, Shawn. All right, so with that, we'll be back with linebackers next week. Once again, we'll be checking your comments, your questions. Please add them. Please add them on the YouTube channel. That's on the NFL IDP Advice Network. Shawn, any other final closing thoughts before we wrap?
Just keep in mind that this is a very specific scoring system, so your leagues will probably vary, especially a defensive tackle, because this does favor, again, sacks, quarterback hits over high tackle volume. So it's okay if ours don't match yours.
All right. So if you like this show, give it a thumbs up. Do subscribe, as I mentioned, once again, for the third time here in the last 2 minutes, NFL IDP Advice Network. And with that, give me at RickyRod66, Shawn at Shawn8386 a follow on X. And with that, let's wrap her up. And we'll be back in another week or so. On behalf of Shawn, this is Ricky wishing you, your family, and your friends great health and happiness. Be kind to one another, and we'll catch you next time. Bye, everybody.